The Ancient City. A study on the religion, laws, and institutions of Greece and Rome.
Numa Denis Fustel De Coulanges.
Book 3rd, The City. Chapter 16, The Roman. The Athenian.
This same religion which had founded society, and which had governed it for a long time, also gave the human mind its direction, and man his character. By its dogmas and its practices it gave to the Greek and the Roman a certain manner of thinking and acting, and certain habits of which they were a long time in divesting themselves. It showed men gods everywhere, little gods, gods easily irritated and malevolent. It crushed man with the fear of always having gods against him, and left him no liberty in his acts. We must inquire what place religion occupied in the life of a Roman. His house was for him what a temple is for us. He finds there his worship and his gods. His fire is a god, the walls, the doors, the threshold are gods, the boundary marks which surround his field are also gods. The tomb is an altar, and his ancestors are divine beings. Each one of his daily actions is a rite, his whole day belongs to his religion. Morning and evening he invokes his fire, his penates, and his ancestors. In leaving and entering his house he addresses a prayer to them. Every meal is a religious act, which he shares with his domestic divinities. Birth, initiation, the taking of the toga, marriage, and the anniversaries of all these events, are the solemn acts of his worship. He leaves his house, and can hardly take a step without meeting some sacred object, either a chapel, or a place formerly struck by lightning, or a tomb. Sometimes he must step back and pronounce a prayer, sometimes he must turn his eyes and cover his face, to avoid the sight of some ill-boding object. Every day he sacrifices in his house, every month in his curry, several months a year with his gens or his tribe. Above all these gods, he must offer worship to those of the city. There are in Rome more gods than citizens. He offers sacrifices to thank the gods, he offers them, and by far the greater number, to appease their wrath. One day he figures in a procession, dancing after a certain ancient rhythm, to the sound of the sacred flute. Another day he conducts chariots, in which lie statues of the divinities. Another time it is a lectisternium, a table is set in a street, and loaded with provisions, upon beds lie statues of the gods, and every Roman passes bowing, with a crown upon his head, and a branch of laurel in his hand. There is a festival for seed time, one for the harvest, and one for the pruning of the vines. Before corn has reached the ear, the Roman has offered more than 10 sacrifices, and invoked some 10 divinities for the success of his harvest. He has, above all, a multitude of festivals for the dead, because he is afraid of them. He never leaves his own house without looking to see if any bird of bad augury appears. There are words which he dares not pronounce for his life. If he experiences some desire, he inscribes his wish upon a tablet which he places at the feet of the statue of a divinity. At every moment he consults the gods, and wishes to know their will. He finds all his resolutions in the entrails of victims, in the flight of birds, in the warning of the lightning. The announcement of a shower of blood, or of an ox that has spoken, troubles him and makes him tremble. He will be tranquil only after an expiatory ceremony shall restore him to peace with the gods. He steps out of his house always with the right foot first. He has his hair cut only during the full moon. He carries amulets upon his person. He covers the walls of his house with magic inscriptions against fire. He knows of formulas for avoiding sickness, and of others for curing it, but he must repeat them 27 times, and spit in a certain fashion at each repetition. He does not deliberate in the Senate if the victims have not given favorable signs. He leaves the assembly of the people if he hears the cry of a mouse. He renounces the best laid plans if he perceives a bad presage, or if an ill-omened word has struck his ear. He is brave in battle, but on condition that the auspices assure him the victory. This Roman whom we present here is not the man of the people, the feeble-minded man whom misery and ignorance have made superstitious. We are speaking of the patrician, the noble, powerful, and rich man. This patrician is, by turns, warrior, magistrate, consul, farmer, merchant, but everywhere and always he is a priest, and his thoughts are fixed upon the gods. Patriotism, love of glory, and love of gold, whatever power these may have over his soul, the fear of the gods still governs everything. Horace has written the most striking truth concerning the Romans.
Diste minorem quod geris, imperas.
You rule because you bear yourself lower than the gods.
Men have sometimes called this a political religion, but can we suppose that a Senate of 300 members, a body of 3,000 patricians, should have agreed so unanimously to deceive an ignorant people? And that, for ages, during so many rivalries, struggles, and personal hatreds, not a single voice was raised to say, "This is a falsehood"? If a patrician had betrayed the secrets of his sect, if, addressing himself to the plebeians, who impatiently supported the yoke of this religion, he had disembarrassed and freed them from these auspices and priesthoods, this man would immediately have obtained so much credit that he might have become the master of the state. Does any one suppose that if these patricians had not believed in the religion which they practiced, such a temptation would not have been strong enough to determine at least one among them to reveal the secret? We greatly deceive ourselves on the nature of man if we suppose a religion can be established by convention and supported by imposture. Let any one count in Livy how many times this religion embarrassed the patricians themselves, how many times it stood in the way of the Senate and impeded its action, and then decide if this religion was invented for the convenience of statesmen. It was very late, not till the time of the Scipios, that they began to believe that religion was useful to the government, but then religion was already dead in their minds. Let us take a Roman of the first days. We will choose one of the greatest commanders, Camillus, who was 5 times dictator, and who was victorious in more than 10 battles. To be just, we must consider him quite as much a priest as warrior. He belonged to the Furian gens. His surname is a word which designates a priestly function. When a child he was required to wear the praetexta, which indicated his caste, and the bulla, which kept bad fortune from him. He grew up, taking a daily part in the ceremonies of the worship. He passed his youth in studying religious rites. A war broke out, and the priest became a soldier. He was seen, when wounded in the thigh, in a cavalry combat, to draw the iron from the wound and continue to fight. After several campaigns he was raised to magistracies. As consular tribune he offered the public sacrifices, acted as judge, and commanded the army. A day comes when men think of him for the dictatorship. On that day the magistrate in office, after having watched during a clear night, consults the gods. His thoughts are fixed upon Camillus, whose name he pronounces in a low voice, and his eyes are fixed upon the heavens, where he seeks the presages. The gods send only good ones, for Camillus is agreeable to them, and he is named dictator. Now, as chief of the army, he leaves the city, not without having consulted the auspices and slain many victims. He has under his orders many officers and almost as many priests, a pontiff, augurs, haruspices, keepers of the sacred chickens, assistants at sacrifices, and a bearer of the sacred fire. His work is to finish the war against Veii, which for 9 years has been besieged without success. Veii is an Etruscan city, that is to say, almost a sacred city. It is against piety, more than courage, that the Romans have to contend. If the Romans have been unsuccessful for 9 years, it is because the Etruscans have a better knowledge of the rites that are agreeable to the gods, and the magic formulas that gain their favor. Rome, on her side, has opened the Sibylline books, and has sought the will of the gods there. It appears that the Latin festival has been vitiated by some neglect of form, and the sacrifice is renewed. Still the Etruscans retain their superiority. Only one resource is left, to seize an Etruscan priest and learn the secret of the gods from him. A Veientine priest is taken and brought to the Senate.
To ensure the success of Rome,
He says,
the level of the Alban Lake must be lowered, taking good care that the water does not run into the sea.
the Romans obey. They dig many canals and ditches, and the water of the lake is lost in the plain. At this moment Camillus is elected dictator. He repairs to the army at Veii. He is sure of success, for all the oracles have been revealed, all the commands of the gods have been fulfilled. Moreover, before leaving Rome, he has promised the protecting gods festivals and sacrifices. In order to ensure success, he does not neglect human means, he increases the army, improves its discipline, and constructs a subterranean gallery to penetrate into the citadel. The day for the attack arrives. Camillus leaves his tent, he takes the auspices and sacrifices victims. The pontiffs and augurs surround him, clothed in the paludamentum, he invokes the gods.
Under thy conduct, O Apollo, and by thy will which inspires me, I march to take and destroy the city of Veii. To thee I promise and devote a tenth part of the spoils.
But it is not enough to have gods on his side, the enemy also has a powerful divinity that protects him. Camillus invokes this divinity in these words.
Queen Juno, who at present inhabitest Veii, I pray thee come with us conquerors, follow us into our city, let our city become thine.
Then, the sacrifices being finished, the prayers pronounced, the formulas recited, when the Romans are sure that the gods are for them, and no god any longer defends the enemy, the assault is made, and the city is taken. Such was Camillus. A Roman general was a man who understood admirably how to fight, who knew, above all, how to command obedience, but who believed firmly in the augurs, who performed religious acts every day, and who was convinced that what was of most importance was not courage, or even discipline, but the enunciation of certain formulas exactly pronounced, according to the rites. These formulas, addressed to the gods, determined them and constrained them almost always to give him the victory. For such a general the supreme recompense was for the Senate to permit him to offer the triumphal sacrifice. Then he ascends the sacred chariot drawn by 4 white horses, he wears the sacred robe with which the gods are clothed on festal days, his head is crowned, his right hand holds a laurel branch, his left the ivory scepter. These are exactly the attributes and the costume of Jupiter's statue. With this almost divine majesty he shows himself to the citizens, and goes to render homage to the true majesty of the greatest of the Roman gods. He climbs the slope of the Capitol, arrives before the temple of Jupiter, and immolates victims. The fear of the gods was not a sentiment peculiar to the Roman, it also reigned in the heart of the Greek. These peoples, originally established by religion, and elevated by it, long preserved the marks of their first education. We know the scruples of the Spartan, who never commenced an expedition before the full moon, who was continually sacrificing victims to know whether he ought to fight, and who renounced the best planned and most necessary enterprises because a bad presage frightened him. The Athenian was not less scrupulous. An Athenian army never set out on a campaign before the 7th day of the month, and when a fleet set sail on an expedition, great care was taken to regild the statue of Pallas. Xenophon declares that the Athenians had more religious festivals than any other Greek people.
How many victims offered to the gods?
Says Aristophanes.
How many temples? How many statues? How many sacred processions? At every moment of the year we see religious feasts and crowned victims.
The city of Athens and its territory are covered with temples and chapels. Some are for the city worship, others for the tribes and demes, and still others for family worship. Every house is itself a temple, and in every field there is a sacred tomb. The Athenian whom we picture to ourselves as so inconstant, so capricious, such a free thinker, has, on the contrary, a singular respect for ancient traditions and ancient rites. His principal religion, that which secures his most fervent devotion, is the worship of ancestors and heroes. He worships the dead and fears them. One of his laws obliges him to offer them yearly the first fruits of his harvest, another forbids him to pronounce a single word that can call down their anger. Whatever relates to antiquity is sacred to the Athenian. He has old collections, in which are recorded his rites, from which he never departs. If a priest introduces the slightest innovation into the worship, he is punished with death. The strangest rites are observed from age to age. One day in the year the Athenians offer a sacrifice in honor of Ariadne, and because it was said that the beloved of Theseus died in childbirth, they are compelled to imitate the cries and movements of a woman in travail. They celebrate another festival, called Oschophoria, which is a sort of pantomime, representing the return of Theseus to Attica. They crown the wand of a herald because Theseus's herald crowned his staff. They utter a certain cry which they suppose the herald uttered, and a procession is formed, and each wears the costume that was in fashion in Theseus's time. On another day the Athenians did not fail to boil vegetables in a pot of a certain kind. This was a rite the origin of which was lost in dim antiquity, and of which no one knew the significance, but which was piously renewed each year. The Athenian, like the Roman, had unlucky days. On these days no marriage took place, no enterprise was begun, no assembly was held, and justice was not administered. The 18th and 19th day of every month was employed in purifications. The day of the Plentyria, a day unlucky above all, they veiled the statue of the great Athene Polias. On the contrary, on the day of the Panathenia, the veil of the goddess was carried in grand procession, and all the citizens, without distinction of age or rank, made up the cortege. The Athenian offered sacrifices for the harvests, for the return of rain, and for the return of fair weather. He offered them to cure sickness, and to drive away famine or pestilence. Athens has its collection of ancient oracles, as Rome has her Sibylline books, and supports in the Prytaneum men who foretell the future. In her streets we meet at every step soothsayers, priests, and interpreters of dreams. The Athenian believes in portents. Sneezing, or a ringing in the ears, arrests him in an enterprise. He never goes on shipboard without taking the auspices. Before marrying he does not fail to consult the flight of birds. The assembly of the people disperses as soon as any one declares that there has appeared in the heavens an ill-boding sign. If a sacrifice has been disturbed by the announcement of bad news, it must be recommenced. The Athenian hardly commences a sentence without first invoking good fortune. He puts the same words at the head of all his decrees. On the speaker's stand the orator prefers to commence with an invocation to the gods and heroes who inhabit the country. The people are led by oracles. The orators, to give their advice more force, repeat, at every moment.
The goddess ordains thus.
Nicias belongs to a great and rich family. While still young he conducts to the sanctuary of Delos a theoria, that is to say, victims, and a chorus to sing the praises of the god during the sacrifice. Returning to Athens, he offers a part of his fortune in homage to the gods, dedicating a statue to Athene and a chapel to Dionysius. By turns he is Hestiator, and pays the expense of the sacred repast of his tribe, and Chorgus, when he supports a chorus for the religious festivals. No day passes that he does not offer a sacrifice to some god. He has a soothsayer attached to his house, who never leaves it, and whom he consults on public affairs, as well as on his own. Having been appointed a general, he commands an expedition against Corinth. While he is returning victorious to Athens, he perceives that 2 of his dead soldiers have been left, without burial, upon the enemy's territory. He is seized with a religious scruple. He stops his fleet, and sends a herald to demand of the Corinthians permission to bury the 2 bodies. Some time after, the Athenian people are deliberating upon the Sicilian expedition. Nicias ascends the speaker's stand, and declares that his priests and soothsayers announce prestiges which are opposed to the expedition. Alcibiades, it is true, has other diviners who interpret the oracles in a contrary sense. The people are undecided. Men come in who have just arrived from Egypt. They have consulted the god Ammon, who is beginning to be quite the fashion, and they report this oracle from him. The Athenians will capture all the Syracusans. The people immediately decide for war. Nicias, much against his will, commands the expedition. Before setting out, he offers a sacrifice, according to custom. He takes with him, like other generals, a troop of diviners, sacrificers, haruspices, and heralds. The fleet carries its sacred fire. Every vessel has an emblem representing some god. But Nicias has little hope. Is not misfortune announced by prodigies enough? Crows have injured a statue of Pallas, a man has mutilated himself upon an altar, and the departure takes place during the unlucky days of the Plentyria. Nicias knows only too well that this war will be fatal to him and his country. During the whole course of his campaign he always appears timorous and circumspect. He hardly dares to give the signal for a battle, he whom they know to be so brave a soldier and so skillful a general. The Athenians cannot take Syracuse, and, after cruel losses, they are forced to decide upon returning home. Nicias prepares his fleet for the return. The sea is still free. But an eclipse of the moon happens. He consults his diviner. The diviner answers that the presage is unfavorable, and that they must wait 3 times 9 days. Nicias obeys. He passes all this time inactive, offering many sacrifices to appease the wrath of the gods. During this delay the enemy close up the port and destroy his fleet. Nothing is left for him but to retreat by land, and this is impossible. Neither he nor any of his soldiers escapes the Syracusans. What did the Athenians say at the news of this disaster? They knew the personal courage of Nicias, and his admirable constancy. Nor did they dream of blaming him for having followed the dictates of religion. They found but one thing to reproach him for. This was for having taken with him an ignorant diviner. For this man had been mistaken as to the meaning of the eclipse of the moon. He ought to have known that, for an army wishing to retreat, a moon that conceals its light is a favorable presage.